All right. Well, my life has been one disaster after another, and that's the way I like it. I like wind, all kinds of wind. Doesn't matter if it's tornado, hurricane, straight line, thunderstorm winds. And of course, I found that I can actually make a living by surveying and assessing damage to buildings after these events. All right. So for those of you who don't know me, who am I? Well, I'm a forensic engineer that evaluates damage to specific buildings, and I've worked at Hague since 1983. I'm also a forensic meteorologist to evaluate weather conditions at the time of certain incidents, including alleged, and I underline that in my figure of speech, because a lot of my work is actually fraud-based, where people try to simulate certain natural phenomenon and then file an insurance claim for it. For example, give you an example of it. Somebody takes a ball peen hammer to their car or the roof to try to simulate hail. Well, we know how to figure that out. So it takes a really smart criminal to get by us. And I'm happy to say that I haven't been fooled yet to my knowledge. I'm a storm chaser. Yes, I chase tornadoes and hurricanes, again, because that's my hobby. I have a profession that mirrors my hobby. I'm very grateful to Josh Werman, Karen Kasiba for asking me to help them out in their Center of Severe Weather Research programs of Vortex 2 rotate and twirl projects. 5 years in deploying instrumented pods right in front of tornadoes, point blank range. Yes, it's dangerous, but there are some good information to account from that. I mean, radar, the Doppler on wheels even, shoots way above the surface. And we need to find out what the winds are doing at the surface, where people live, where there are buildings. And I love getting back to the science. Then I'm a volunteer. In fact, too much, I think, volunteer. But I've been on a number of committees, including the AMS, ASCE, National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center. I presented more than 1,000 lectures, public, private, universities around the country. I'm under contract with the National Weather Service to teach the WCM's EF scale and how to assess damage. And then I attend conferences when I can and talk there. In fact, if you've added it all up, and I have literally spoken more than a year in terms of hours. If you were just to put it hour to hour. Surveyor is sort of a private as well as hobby that I do. Sometimes we get funded for surveying tornado and hurricane damage. Sometimes I assist the Weather Service on surveying damage, and sometimes I do it on my own because I want to write a paper or something. And then I love traveling. If that isn't enough, so far I'm 60 countries and counting. So been delayed this year, obviously, due to COVID. Next year, I hope to pick that back up. Okay, so just to kind of put a summary in here, and I know it's a lot of information. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I have done 60 detailed tornado damage surveys. I went through, and this is the best I can recall, where I have actual tracks plotted. I have thousands and thousands of photos of each event. And then there are 23 hurricane damage surveys all the way back to 1980, my first Hurricane Allen. Again, thousands and thousands of photos have been taken, lots of documents written about these events, tracks plotted, and survey reports issued. Some of these were reports that we issued to clients, some were on my own. One of the big things about El Reno, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly and then I'll finish, is the multi-vortex standpoint. The Doppler on wheels, OU Rex pole here, and you see the raw max outline of the tornado. Well, we went with fine granularity and looked at this. There was a smoothing that was done to smooth out, and some of that did bring down the values of the wind. But when we closely look at that and compare them to the EF ratings, we found pretty good agreement between the higher numbers and the reds. But one thing that did stand out to us was the area where the Samaras vehicle had the very highest winds on the RAX pole, but yet there were no DIs, zero. So we really don't know what those winds were there from a DI standpoint. Trying to relate EF scale and radar is an apples and oranges thing. I know it's very controversial, but EF scale is 3-second gust, 10 meters point measurement in open terrain, whereas radar is an instantaneous velocity that varies with height and range. There are volume, size, and weighting kind of functions in there, beam blockage, ground clutter. So what is the wind profile of a vortex with height? That's still variable and not agreed on entirely. But we have a nice article on it in BAMS. All right, well, I went through, I know I was over here about 10 minutes. I apologize for that. But you can see that I really get excited about tornado damage and assessing it. It's my life, it's my passion, it's what I live for. I'm very happy to be a part of this great group of people here. I urge everybody to try to attend the Thwarts meeting in the future, or at least online, whichever way it goes. If you're interested in this sort of thing, follow your passion. So thanks, Aaron, thanks, Tanya, thanks, Frank, for the invite.
All right, last question. How do we get better warning notifications for storms? With an overload of cell towers and power outages, how do we get better heads up to people?
Well, the warning process has really improved over the last 40 years. That's a great thing, and there's been Doppler radar now that has better with warning. We still have problems with gaps in the system. For example, we still have hundreds of miles between Doppler radars, so they cannot see low levels outside of maybe 60 miles or so. They can't see what's happening near the ground, and it depends on spotters to report in that they got something on the ground. So we're still kind of in the olden ages of that until we have these radars up. Now, the Dallas-Fort Worth area has these small radars called CASA radars, and they're being deployed around the area, and they're able to see underneath the WSR-88D beam. And so they're able to give a lot more information about what's happening down low. And this is now in a test stage, and we're going to see how this does over the next 10 years or so to see how this may improve the warning system. So there is a movement in that direction for better warning. I mean, you got to see it in order to warn for it, right? So I think these CASA radars are a great idea, and we'll see how well they do.
All right, last question. I'm going to close it down. There are several different ways to rate tornado damage. The US uses the EF scale. Europe uses the F scale with adding a T. T means narrow definition of damage. Do you think we need a more global scale?
I think we're working in that direction with the new and updated EF scale. We are incorporating the information that we're getting from the Canadian friends of ours and from European friends, and trying to go ahead and make this an international type scale. There is obviously resistance in parts of the world to that because they don't build the same way as they do in the US. I mean, a house in the UK is much heavier construction normally than it is in the US. So we're going to have to be able to incorporate that in the new EF scale.